Welcome to the Washington Watch News Desk. I'm Sarah Holliday with today's top stories. Just last night, President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke over the phone for 2 hours. During that talk, they agreed to have another summit. The Kremlin confirmed plans for the meeting, and while it's slated to take place in Hungary, neither side has provided a date yet. A Kremlin aide said that during the phone call, Putin told Trump that supplying long-range missiles to Ukraine would harm the peace process and damage U.S.-Russian ties. Here's what Trump said to reporters.
Well, of course, what do you think he's going to say? Please sell Tomahawks? No, he doesn't want Tomahawk is a vicious weapon. It's a vicious, offensive, incredibly destructive weapon. Nobody wants Tomahawks shot at him.
Meanwhile, the timing couldn't be more charged. President Trump and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky met at the White House today, and Zelensky came ready to talk military support, including U.S.-made long-range Tomahawk missiles.
I think not ready, but I think that I'm confident that with your help, we can stop this war, and we really need it.
After nearly 4 years of this war, tensions have only been escalating, especially after Russia's recent large-scale attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. After today's meeting and last night's phone call, we'll keep you updated as details emerge. Stateside, Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, was charged on Thursday with sharing sensitive government information in an alleged violation of the Espionage Act. The 18-count indictment accuses Bolton of sharing notes with 2 of his relatives for possible use in a book he was writing. The shared materials allegedly included over 1,000 pages of information about his day-to-day activities as national security advisor, which included top-secret information. Trump was asked about the indictment on Thursday.
I didn't know that. You told me for the first time, but I think he's, a bad person. I think he's a bad guy. Yeah, he's a bad guy. It's too bad, but it's the way it goes.
If Bolton is convicted, each count is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. But any sentence would be determined by a judge based on a range of factors. A court date has yet to be determined. Now, in Nigeria, religious freedom is in crisis. A chorus of voices is rising, calling on President Trump to designate that nation as a country of particular concern, or CPC, to confront the escalating genocide against its Christian minority. Advocates have put a spotlight on Trump's first-term fight against faith-based terror, and they're asking him to make it part of his second term as well. The mainstream media has been largely silent, or worse, dismissive. Outlets like the Associated Press have downplayed the crisis, framing it as mere, quote, insecurity or, quote, claims of violence, despite hard data and eyewitness accounts. However, in Nigeria's Christian-heavy Middle Belt, the horror is unrelenting. Islamist groups like Boko Haram torch villages, kidnap priests, and massacre believers. Over 7,000 Christians killed this year alone, roughly 50,000 since 2009, with 18,000 churches destroyed and 5 million displaced. Leaders like Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Chris Smith have pushed a bipartisan bill to sanction Nigerian officials allowing the carnage and force a CPC label, which would reverse the Biden administration's 2021 delisting. Several other leaders and groups have also been speaking out, putting pressure on the Trump administration to do something. So, with Nigeria's faithful begging for a watch list spot, will Trump act, and will the media finally listen? One thing seems certain: silence only fuels the slaughter. And those are today's headlines. I'm Sarah Holliday. Dive deeper with the Washington Stand at washingtonstand.com. Up next is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We're back Monday with more stories that matter.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins starts now.
These are not hate rallies, as some of the right-wingers try to say. These are Save America rallies, Love America rallies, Care About America rallies.
That was Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer defending what Republicans are calling the Hate America rallies planned for this weekend across the country, including right here in Southern California at the site of this year's Pray Vote Stand Summit at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Welcome to this October 17th edition of Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins, and we're broadcasting in front of a live audience here at the Real Life Network studios in Chino Hills, California, which is the site of the 2025 Pray Vote Stand Summit. Thanks so much for tuning in. By the way, if you live here in Southern California, there's still room for you. If not, you can still join us for this weekend's event on the Stand Firm app. You can download the Stand Firm app in the App Store, or you can watch on the Real Life Network. Well, coming up on this Friday edition of Washington Watch, liberal activists and Democrat lawmakers are preparing for the second nationwide No Kings protest on Saturday, targeting President Trump's so-called use of federal authority. Republicans are calling it a pure political theater amid the ongoing government shutdown. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise will join us in just a bit to break it all down. And in the Middle East, a senior Hamas leader says the group will retain control of Gaza and will not disarm, openly defying the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann joins me with what this means for Israel and the region's fragile peace. We begin tonight with that fragile ceasefire in the Middle East, where Hamas terrorists continue to tighten their grip on the Gaza Strip by killing and intimidating their opponents. Joining me now is Washington Stand reporter Sarah Holliday, who's been following today's developments. Sarah, what's the latest on the ceasefire violations, and what do we know about the remaining deceased hostages who've yet to be turned over to Israel?
Tony, Israel says Hamas terrorists have so far returned only 10 bodies, with one not even confirmed to be an Israeli hostage. That leaves 19 remains still missing. People are saying this is clearly in violation of the terms of the deal. At the same time, Hamas has released 20 living hostages, while Israel has already freed around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Israeli officials say they won't tolerate any further delays. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warned today that if Hamas doesn't fully comply, and soon, Israel is prepared to resume full military operations. Tony?
Yeah, as I mentioned, very fragile, something we need to be praying about, and something we will be praying about here at the Pray Vote Stand Summit in Southern California. Also in international news, President Trump met with Ukrainian President Zelensky today at the White House. It seems like he's ready to push for another peace deal. What's the latest update from that meeting?
Yes, Tony. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky visited the White House today, and he had a key request on the table: Tomahawk missiles to bolster Ukraine's defense against Russia. President Trump has been positioning himself as a mediator, and he says that both sides are interested in a peace deal.
We have to get together. It's a very small group of people. It's the president, and the president. Okay, 3 presidents. And I'm the mediator president. And I'm mediating not an easy situation, but the threat of that is always there. Tomahawks are very dangerous weapons. They're incredible weapons. If you like warfare, it's one of the most accurate.
Tony, this comes just one day after President Trump spoke with President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, on the phone for 2 hours. Trump called the conversation productive, and he announced plans for another summit. The details of what led to this sudden meeting remain unclear, especially after their last summit in Alaska in August ended without progress.
I think tomahawks had something to do with it. Thanks, Sarah. I want to switch gears to the government shutdown, which may be further impacted, actually, by tomorrow's nationwide protest. Now, liberal activists are planning a second round of these No Kings demonstrations on Saturday, aimed again at criticizing President Trump and his use of federal authority. What's the latest on the breadth of these protests?
That's right, Tony. Organizers of these protests are accusing the Trump administration of threatening First Amendment rights. However, many conservatives argue that the demonstrations are really more political theater than they are patriotism. Several Democratic senators and members of Congress are expected to join in these protests, many of which will be taking in cities all across the country, including here in Washington, D.C. House Speaker Mike Johnson, though, he went a little further. He claimed that Democrats are prolonging the shutdown in order to stage these protests.
Republicans, by the way, are the party that fights to maximize your liberty. And we believe, just as our founders did, that every American has been endowed by God himself with unalienable rights, and that includes the rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. But tomorrow, this rally is not about freedom. It's about the opposite. For many of our Democrat colleagues, tomorrow is about creating really a spectacle.
Meanwhile, the government shutdown continues after Senate Democrats have blocked a Republican funding bill for the 10th time. GOP leaders say they've offered multiple compromises, but Democrats refuse to negotiate. And at what cost? It is leaving troops and federal workers in limbo as political gridlock drags on. Tony.
All right, Sarah, thanks. I did mention this at the top of the program. We've received reports that liberal protesters plan to show up here at our Pray Vote Stand Summit. This is going to be their No Kings rally, but actually I have news for them. We are celebrating a king here, King Jesus. And give us the latest, though, on the left targeting our event out here in Southern California.
That's right, Tony. Well, as you mentioned, this weekend in Chino Hills, California, thousands of Christians are gathering for Family Research Council's Pray Vote Stand Summit, which, as you know, is a powerful two-day event. It calls on believers to stand firm in faith, protect parental rights, defend religious freedom, and engage the culture with truth. While the summit promotes prayer and principled action, left-wing activists behind these so-called No Kings protests are organizing mass demonstrations attacking the Trump legacy and accusing America of systemic injustice. In fact, I'm hearing reports that some protesters are already outside of the building that you are in right now. So, as protesters take to the streets, the Pray Vote Stand movement is offering a clear alternative: faith over fear, conviction over chaos, and a call to restore godly leadership in our nation. And speaking of the summit, Liberty Counsel is demanding the reinstatement of Baton Rouge pastor Luke Ashe, one of the speakers at Pray Vote Stand Summit, who was fired from the public library for refusing to use transgender pronouns. And he cited his Christian faith as the reason for why. Liberty Counsel has given the library until November 10th to reinstate him and revise its pronoun policy or face a lawsuit.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for that update. Well, I want to jump right into the Pray Vote Stand Summit that will begin tonight. And as you mentioned, Pastor Luke Ashe is going to be a part of a panel of a number of individuals who have stood firm for the faith. But before I get to that, I want to bring in the chairman of the board at the Family Research Council, former Congresswoman from Minnesota, Michelle Bachmann. Michelle, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, Tony. Thanks. Good to be with you.
And, of course, Michelle's going to be a part of the Pray Vote Stand Summit. And I want to go to the issue of the kind of fragile peace agreement in Israel between Hamas and Israel. It doesn't look like Hamas is going to go easy.
No, I don't think they're going to comply. I think they've made it clear they're belligerent right now about not complying. They won't return the corpses of the dead hostages. They refuse to demilitarize or de-radicalize. So I think we've been told what their position is. Therefore, it's almost like we skipped to the end of the agreement, and President Trump promised Israel that if Hamas wouldn't comply, they have the right to go in and to finish the war. So it almost feels in some ways that we're there, but I don't think so. I think the administration is going to demand that Hamas be given chances, and then we'll see what happens.
You know, listening from the very start of the agreement, Benjamin Netanyahu was very clear that they are not going to compromise on the security of the nation.
Nor
They're
should they.
not going
That's
to relive October the 7th.
That's right, nor should they. So I think, again, I'm of two minds about this. I really was opposed to the agreement when I first read it because it's doing exactly what the Bible forbids, and that's dividing the land of Israel. That has serious and profound consequences. But that hasn't happened yet. I don't know if it will. But the good news is we got all living hostage back. We're getting some of the deceased hostages back. We may get another 8 or 9 of those. But then I think the world is seeing this is who Hamas is. So there's no playing around about this. And especially when we're seeing Hamas killing their own people, and President Trump is weighing in on that.
Well, and where's the international community that's been criticizing Israel for what they call civilians? There's been many terrorists have been killed. The fighters have been killed. And the international community criticizing Israel for that collateral damage, but yet saying nothing as Hamas is killing people, executing people on the streets.
Well, yeah, and there's a phrase that says, no Jews, no news. So if media organizations can slam Israel, that's what they'll do. But the bad guys are Hamas. So does the media really want to show the bad guys that Hamas is? They're probably going to have to at a certain point. So I'm a little bit optimistic that Israel's going to be able to go in and finish the job, but under no circumstances should Qatar or Turkey or Egypt or Saudi Arabia get the ability to control
So
Gaza.
what about, but they're already exerting control at the 2025 Gaza Peace Summit in Egypt. Erdogan, president of Turkey, objected to the presence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and he was disinvited.
Well, but I think it's actually, I think probably the Prime Minister of Israel was happy to be disinvited, to not be there. I read that agreement that they signed.
Right.
And it was like cotton candy. It was saying, love, peace, tolerance, and sustainability is what it said. And so it was a great day where President Trump got to speak in the Knesset, and that was the real event. And then he went down to Egypt. And honestly, again, if people read what they signed, it doesn't bind anyone to anything. So I think it's still the jury is out, and I think God is going to have his way. He is the defender of Israel. I really believe Israel won that war with Gaza. They won it. They controlled 80% of the land. They won it. And so I think that my best hope is that they'll go back and they will control it, and they'll be in charge of the disposition of what happens. And actually, there's a fair amount of people who should be allowed to just leave and go elsewhere, not to the United States, but go elsewhere, to other Muslim countries. And so I'm hoping that that'll happen.
All right, Michelle, just a minute left. Talking about the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit here at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Why is it such a significant time for us to gather to pray, vote, and stand?
Well, because we know who we are. We are people of the living God. We believe in the power of prayer. We've seen the power of prayer working. Just the hostages coming home as answer to the prayer. But voting is extremely important. So when God's people show up, we see a completely different type of government, a godly government versus an ungodly government. And then when we stand, we are informed about the word and we stand on the word. That's our greatest strength. And I saw the protesters when I came in. I came in just a few minutes ago. They were out there. The police far outnumber them. And I almost felt sorry for them. They looked pathetic standing over there. They don't stand on the word. They stand on lies.
We're going to pray for them, too.
Yes, that's right.
Michelle, thanks for being here. Always great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, don't go away. We're back with more Washington Watch right after this.
Right now, like-minded Christ followers from across the country are gathering at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills in Southern California for Family Research Council's Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. If ever there were a time we needed God to move in our nation, it is now. The Pray, Vote, Stand Summit brings together Christian leaders, issue experts, and government officials for a time of prayer, inspiration, and action. A sample of topics include chemical abortion and the future of the pro-life movement, the search for peace as Israel struggles against the world, and how to engage artificial intelligence from a biblical perspective. We encourage you to join this powerful gathering as we seek cultural renewal and spiritual revival. Stream the summit on the Real Life Network and the Stand Firm app. For more information, visit PrayVoteStand.org.
For over 4,000 years, the Jewish people have had legal, historical, and biblical ties to the land of Israel, especially the heartland of Israel, Judea and Samaria, which much of the world still calls the West Bank. To Israelis, Judea and Samaria is far more than a name. It's the center of their ancestral homeland where nearly 80% of the Bible's events took place. Abraham purchased property in Hebron, Jacob in Shechem, Joshua made an altar on Mount Ebal and led the Israelites into a covenant before God. On Mount Gerizim, overlooking Shechem, Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman at the well about worshiping neither on Mount Gerizim nor in Jerusalem, but in spirit and in truth. Judea and Samaria is nearly a quarter of Israel's current landmass, not a small strip of land on the Jordan River, but a vital and strategic part of the nation's identity. The October 7th massacre, launched from Gaza, shattered the illusion that giving away territory brings peace. Gaza, which was once seen as the cornerstone of a two-state solution, became a launchpad for terror. Today, only 21% of Israelis support a Palestinian state. Trust in a two-state solution has all but collapsed. The Middle East is changing. Iran's grip is weakening, new alliances are forming, but Western countries and some U.S. officials still chase the mirage of a two-state solution. History speaks clearly. The 2005 Gaza withdrawal, backed by the U.S., led not to peace, but to a terrorist regime. Judea and Samaria are 24 times larger than Gaza, deeply woven into Israel's geographic and spiritual fabric. To surrender them would not bring peace. It would invite conflict and existential danger. Family Research Council stands with Israel's rightful claim to sovereignty. It's time for America to do the same, for history, for justice, and for lasting security in the Middle East. Welcome back to this Friday edition of Washington Watch, where we're broadcasting in front of a live audience here at the Real Life Network studios in Southern California. And we're doing this in advance of the Pray Vote Stand Summit, which begins this evening, if you're in Southern California. Depending on traffic, you can get here in time. If not, you can join us on the Stand Firm app. Go to the App Store, get the Stand Firm app, or watch on the Real Life Network. All right, I want to go back to discuss the latest on the government shutdown and get some perspective from the House leadership. Joining me now to discuss this and more is House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who represents the 1st Congressional District of Louisiana. Leader Scalise, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Tony. And it was great to see my friend and former colleague, Michelle Bachmann, with you a few minutes ago.
Yeah, absolutely. She's out here with us in Southern California. I just wanted to check before we jump into this. Are you planning on going to any of the No Kings rallies this weekend?
I don't think they want to have me. And, you know, I'd be there with the fire extinguisher to put out the American flags they'd be burning. But, you know, it's going to be a circus of the far left, an accumulation of all the nutty groups that are taking over the Democrat Party. You know, the people that are about to elect Mondami as mayor of New York are the center base of the Democrat Party, sadly. And that's who you're going to see, you know, probably waving Palestinian flags and just spewing hatred towards America and Donald Trump.
I want to play, I played this clip at the top of the show. I want to play it again. This is Chuck Schumer, clip number 10, please.
These are not hate rallies, as some of the right-wingers try to say. These are Save America rallies, Love America rallies, Care About America rallies.
Now, I don't know if you heard what he said. These are snot, these hate rallies. So they're on the defensive on this. They know what is happening here. How does this correlate? What's the relationship with the government shutdown? You know, word is that the Democrats are afraid to come to an agreement and get the government open again until after these rallies have taken place.
Yeah, Tony, and remember, Chuck Schumer and those others that are saying that these are the same people that said they were mostly peaceful protests during the summer of love when they were burning American cities down and killing cops and, you know, just having all kind of crazy roughshod in cities all across America. That's not peaceful protests. It's not people that love America. But at the end of the day, the far left has taken Chuck Schumer hostage And so in return, he's taken America hostage by shutting down the government to try to appease them. It's all, everybody in Washington knows this is Chuck Schumer fearing for his political life, knowing that AOC would beat him in a primary in New York, and to try to shore up the far left socialist base of his party. He shut down the government, not paying our troops, not paying our federal workers, just to try to wreak havoc over the country, to prove to the far left that he's fighting Donald Trump in some kind of way. It's a sick, twisted game that the left is playing with our country.
I was talking with the Speaker, Mike Johnson, this morning, and he basically said the Democrats have painted themselves into a corner. There's really no way out. There's nothing that the Republicans can negotiate because this is a clean CR. It's a measure that Democrats have voted for many times before. What is the way out for Democrats?
Yeah, it's, like you said, the same level of funding that Chuck Schumer himself voted for just in March. And then he got eviscerated by the left because they were angry that he didn't take on Donald Trump and shut down the government back then. And so you knew this was coming. It's just a shame that the American people, especially federal workers, our men and women in uniform, many of whom live paycheck to paycheck, are the ones that are getting the collateral damage from it. So, I think the only off-ramp is whenever the far left lets Chuck Schumer go and releases him, then he's going to release the rest of the country. It's a twisted game. I think the American people, especially in swing states like Georgia, where you've got both senators representing a swing state of Georgia that are voting with Chuck Schumer. And the socialists haven't taken over states like Georgia, right, and yet their senators are both voting with the socialists. And so if those people in Georgia, people in, go down the line, Arizona, where both senators are voting to shut the government down. It only takes 5 Democrats to have some courage and take on Chuck Schumer, and we could get this government back open and still deal with the big differences that divide us.
Yeah, I think self-preservation is going to kick in at some point. Some of these Democrats that are in cycle are going to break with Chuck Schumer. Now, if my memory serves me right, we're 17 days into this shutdown. This is about halfway to the longest shutdown in history. How long do you see this going on?
Well, it's surely going to go through the Hate America rally, but I think beyond that, they're not hearing the anger from the American people yet. And if you look, the mainstream media is covering for the Democrats. They're trying to say, well, it's both sides, as if there's some kind of equivocation. Look, there's only one bill that opens up the government, and all the Democrats are voting no. 99% of them voted no in the House. 99% of them are voting no in the Senate. So there's one party, the Democrat Party, that is shutting down the government. And until they change their tune, doesn't mean they're going to agree with us on big policy differences. This is just a short-term funding bill to get us to November 21st. And that date's coming soon as well. So, when Chuck Schumer comes to his senses, who knows? All you need is 5 Democrats. Chuck Schumer can still stay tied to the loony left. All you need is 5 Democrats to get some common sense and end this madness, Tony.
Steve, you've been in D.C. for a while. I'm finding unusual discipline on behalf of the Republicans under the leadership of the Republican, yourself and Speaker Johnson, where there seems to be a pretty unified message coming out of the Republicans. And, of course, you just have a small margin to work with among Republicans, but there seems to be pretty strong unity.
There really is. I mean, I've never seen Republicans more unified. We're getting a lot of big things done with President Trump. President Trump came in this term, I think you would recognize, even more focused than the first term, where we've been able to get bigger things accomplished in a shorter amount of time. But there's more work to do. And I think that's what the Democrats are trying to do. The Democrats want to ensue chaos throughout the country to slow down the progress we're making. Families just want to see lower prices at the pump, which they're seeing, by the way, lower prices at the grocery store, lower interest rates, which we're finally starting to see. But all of that is just the beginning of what we're trying to accomplish, and there's more we can do. We did it all with just Republican votes, when we stabilized the tax code, when we secured America's border, when we passed legislation to produce more American energy. They were all party line votes. They shouldn't have been. But all Democrats voted no because they just want to fight and oppose Donald Trump. And I think the voters are going to punish them at the polls next year for it.
All right, Leader Steve Scalise, thanks so much for taking time to join us on this Friday. Always great to see you.
Thank you, and keep pressing the message of voting, how important it is. Let's keep prayer. Prayer is so important, but voting as well. God bless you, Tony.
All right, we will do that. Pray, vote, stand. And folks, you can do that this weekend by joining us at the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. Download the Stand Firm app or watch on the Real Life Network. Coming up next, Congressman Kevin Hern of Oklahoma joins us, so don't go away. More straight ahead.
The family is the oldest, most tested, and most reliable unit of society. It is divinely created and sustained. And yet, there are those who are always tampering with its values and structure. That's why we need organizations like the Family Research Council that can effectively defend and strengthen the family.
Family Research Council began over 40 years ago, like all great movements of God, with prayer. Today, rooted in the heart of the nation's capital, FRC continues to champion faith, family, and freedom in public policy and the culture from a biblical worldview.
FRC is one of those bright lights that helps us focus on true north. And I shudder to think, had they not been here, that it could have been worse, worse, worse.
The Family Research Council is key. It's one of a handful of groups that I think will determine whether our children live in a country that enjoyed all of the freedom and all the opportunity that we enjoyed in this great land.
It's just a wonderful parachurch organization that doesn't seek to take the place of the church, but it seeks to assist the family and the church as we try to move forward successfully, not in a defensive mode, but in an offensive mode as we seek to live our lives according to the Holy Scriptures.
FRC is not going to be whooped. We're going to fight. We're going to take a stand. And again, we don't retreat.
You will never see in front of this building here in Washington, D.C., a white flag fly. We will never step back. We will never surrender, and we will never be silent.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. All right, it all begins tonight. That's right, the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit here at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills in Southern California. And we're broadcasting from the Real Life Network studios in front of a live audience. You heard them there just a moment ago. All right, live. All right, if you can't make the trip to California, you can still be a part of this powerful gathering. The Pray, Vote, Stand Summit, as I mentioned, kicks off at 7 p.m. Pacific time. If you're a late night person, that's 10 p.m. Eastern. It's available on the live stream on the Stand Firm app and the Real Life Network. So be sure and tune in. President Trump met with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House today, just one day after having an over 2-hour phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, as we heard earlier. Now, while Ukraine is pressing for new weapons to fight Moscow, President Trump seemed reluctant to provide Kyiv with the long-range Tomahawk missiles they want, saying the U.S. would rather the war be over. Given what President Trump did in the Middle East, could the Russia-Ukraine conflict soon be over? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Congressman Kevin Hern. He's the chair of the Republican Policy Committee and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. He represents the 1st Congressional District of the Sooner State. Congressman Hern, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Great to be with you, Tony. Thanks for all you do.
Well, it's good to have you on the program on this Friday. Let's talk about Russian President Putin coming to the table, actually wanting to talk with the president after resolution of the conflict, or at least what appears to be a resolution of the conflict in the Middle East. I tend to think it's probably his conversation or the comments he made about the Tomahawk missiles possibly going to Ukraine. What say you?
Well, I think that we all know, or certainly what we're seeing with President Trump, it's unorthodox. He's being a strong leader, unlike what we've seen in the past, just what we saw just a few years ago that unleashed Vladimir Putin when we saw the debacle in Afghanistan in August of 21, where, 13 Gold Star families, we saw that happen because of Joe Biden. And then it's unleashed the world. I mean, President Trump has spent the first 9 months in office trying to put out these fights all over the world, and he's got one big one left. And I think what you're seeing right now, I had a Democrat once tell me, leadership, used to work for Obama. I said, why do these leaders, not start wars under President Trump? And they all think They said that because he is a very scary individual, and that's how you have to deal with these guys.
Well, I mean, he's unpredictable. President Trump, unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do, and I think that works to his advantage. A 2-hour conversation with Putin after he basically, gave the stiff arm to the president earlier. It appears to me that Putin's looking for a way out.
Well, it was just reported today that he's lost over 1 million Russians, either killed or maimed so badly that he's having to rely on North Korean troops or, renegades from around the world to come in and fight his war. And that's very problematic for him. And so I think what he's seeing is that President Trump is going to solve this issue with or without him. And he's going to do it through Ukraine, and he's going to do it through NATO. I just had NATO people in my office this past week. And they're concerned about what's going on there and how it's continued to fester and go on, and they're supporting President Trump 100%. It's totally different today with NATO than it was in his first term. They understand he is serious about stopping these wars around the world, and they're getting on board.
You mentioned the troops that are fighting for Russia. I mean, don't forget the North Korean troops that went over to fight with Russia as well. So they are scrounging. They're looking everywhere they can to find troops that they can put on the battlefield. Speaking of wars, the Senate Democrats this week voted to block the annual full-year defense appropriations bill, despite the measure passing out of committee with strong bipartisan support. What does this tell you about the Democrats' priorities?
Well, certainly they hate President Trump more than they love our military. This started back in mid-September when the House passed the clean CR, a Biden funding level CR, because that's what we thought, and Senator Thune thought we could get through quickly so we could get back to regular order with the appropriation bills and pass things like the defense appropriation bill. But Hakeem Jeffries and all Democrats except one voted to shut down the government Then we sent it to the Senate, and now we've seen Chuck Schumer vote almost a dozen times, including not voting for the defense authorization, the defense appropriation yesterday, when 11 Democrats supported it out of committee. Those 11 Democrats voted against it. Had they voted for the bill that they voted out of committee for, we would be funding our troops right now. But they don't even want to fund our troops. Thank God for President Trump for what he did in finding money to support our men and women in uniform. But unfortunately, the very people that protect the Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate are not getting paid, the Capitol Police. I don't know how the Democrats walk by these individuals every single day and say thank you when they're the ones withholding their pay.
Congressman Hearn, just have a little over a minute left. Government shutdown, the House back in their districts, working in their districts. What's waiting for the Republican House and their agenda to deal with when Congress opens back up?
Well, we have the things that, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer want to talk about, health care. We've been doing health care hearings in Ways and Means. We think it's a very bipartisan issue. We need to work on it. This idea that Chuck Schumer wants to get Hakeem Jeffries and Senator Thune and the Speaker together and cut a deal on funding $40 billion a year or $400 billion in premium tax credits that they shortened themselves 2 years ago because they didn't think they needed them longer than 2 years. These are the things we need to get on and make sure that the American people's health care costs don't rise. But this idea of just shutting down the government and hurting everyone is ludicrous. They want to send checks to the insurance companies. We want to make sure that underlying health care is affordable for everyone, not just those folks that are on the Obamacare.
Congressman Kevin Hearn, thanks for joining us on this Friday. Always great to see you, my friend.
Tony, take care.
All right. Coming up, we'll talk about what parents can do to protect and educate their children amid today's increasingly hostile and dangerous environment. And we're going to share the story of a Christian leader in New York. So don't go away.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory. Family Research Council invites you to join our Stand on the Word Bible reading plan as we reflect upon the life of Jesus, the Word who dwelt among us. Come with us and discover the glory of the Word. Read the Gospels and witness the life-changing story of Jesus, His life, death, and resurrection. Come read how Jesus transformed the lives of common people and how those same people transformed the known world through the power of the Holy Spirit. Come with us for 10 to 15 minutes a day and read the entire New Testament before the new year. Find our Bible reading plan and daily devotionals from Tony Perkins at frc.org/Bible. Join us and stand on the Word.
3 years ago, the Supreme Court issued its historic Dobbs decision, a ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, which for nearly 50 years imposed abortion on demand, silencing voters and bypassing the democratic process across the country. The Dobbs decision was a huge step forward against abortion, but it didn't outright ban it. It returned the power to the people. Now, 29 states have laws on the books protecting life. However, there's a catch. Abortion numbers since Dobbs have actually gone up, with an increase of 12% since 2020, climbing from 930,000 to over 1 million in each of the most recent years. So how can this be? The answer is simple: the abortion drug. Today, over 60% of U.S. abortions involve abortion drugs, many of these without medical oversight. In 2021, the Biden administration quietly removed bare minimum long-standing safety protocols for the abortion drug that have existed for 20 years to protect women from life-threatening risks and ensuring informed consent. The Biden DOJ then declared that they would not enforce the Comstock Act, which prevents the mailing of anything that causes an abortion. This is not only illegal, but also dangerous. A study shows nearly 11% of women who take the abortion drug end up in the emergency room with serious complications. Unless the Trump administration reverses these reckless Biden-era policies, pro-life laws will remain largely symbolic. Without a full review and repeal of mifepristone, unborn lives will remain in grave danger, and pregnant mothers will remain at risk. Let's stand for life and end this mail-order abortion drug pipeline. Sign the petition urging the Trump administration to take action at frc.org/stopchemicalabortion.
You're making the effort. I know you got up early. Here we go. Welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us on this Friday Pray Vote Stand edition of Washington Watch as we broadcast in front of a live audience here at the Real Life Network studio. All right, you can be a part of the Pray Vote Stand Summit if you are watching on the Real Life Network, or you can have get the Stand Firm app and watch online. Better yet, if you're in Southern California, come join us. Our word for today comes from Romans chapter 8. Now, if we have died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. For the death he died to sin once for all. But the life he lives to God. So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Let not sin, therefore, reign in your mortal bodies to make you obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under the law, but under grace. You see, when we've been made alive in Christ, we have a new mission: to serve God, not sin. As Christians in this day and age, when people are being identified by their behaviors, we're to be identified and defined by our Savior. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, text Bible to 67742. That's Bible to 67742. All right, as we've mentioned throughout the week, California Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom signed into law last week AB 495, a deeply troubling piece of legislation that undermines parental rights and increases the risk of child abduction and exploitation. And it's a policy that could easily spread to other blue states across the nation. We discussed this yesterday with Jonathan Keller of the California Family Council, but we've only got to a few action items at the end of that segment. So here to help us ensure that laws like AB 495 don't go any further is Heidi St. John. She is the founder and chairman of the board at Firmly Planted Family and host of Off the Bench. She is also the author of about a dozen books, including the bestseller, Becoming Mom Strong: How to Fight with All That's in You for Your Family and Your Faith. Heidi, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Tony. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for being here at the Pray Vote Stand Summit.
Well, I'm excited. What a time to be alive.
Momentous occasion, momentous times in which we live, very consequential, I think, on the timeline of human history. Let's talk a little bit of that. You recently spoke at a rally regarding 495. You live in Washington State, but you understand there's a bigger issue here. Talk about it.
Well, Pastor Jack called me, and it's the first time I've talked to him on the phone when I felt like this man is close to tears, explaining what was happening in the legislature here under the watch from Gavin Newsom. And what we see happening is a tremendous overreach, another assault on parental rights. And what's happening in our public schools, as we were discussing a moment ago, is really a 5-alarm fire. And parents need to watch what's happening in California, because what's happening in California is happening in Oregon and Washington and New York and New Jersey, one of the most recent states to enact or try to enact legislation that will hurt homeschooling. Because educators understand that what they want more than anything is access to children.
They fear homeschooling.
Absolutely. It's a freedom movement.
Yeah, and what they'll do, and this is something that homeschoolers have to be eternally vigilant in, that they will try to work their way in through regulation, controlling the curriculum. They will find some way to silence this competition.
That's right. And I think parents cannot afford to sit this out. And I think it's easy for us to say, well, we've got a Republican governor or a Republican president right now. Some people in red states feel very, very safe. There is no safety. There is no quarter from the attack that is being launched against parents in this country, particularly in education.
So Heidi, let's talk about that for just a moment. As you mentioned, you and I were talking about during the break, I think President Trump has kind of opened the door. I don't think this administration can solve all the problems, because many of our problems are spiritual, they're moral, and that's not the role of the government. But what the government has done is opening the door and protecting the rights of religious Americans to make those changes. So what should parents be doing in light of this moment that we have?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to know who's in charge of the education of our children. And so whether you're homeschooling your kids, like I am, all 7 of our kids were homeschooled, or your kids are in a private school, you still need to be very aware of what's happening in our public schools. And this is not a time for people to sit back and just pretend and coast through it. This is a time for, I think it is all gas, no brakes, that we need to be very, very aware and also stand up and tell the truth. We have a moment in time right now in which we can tell the truth and stand boldly for it. Christians need to engage. Now's the time.
Yeah, that's one of the other benefits of what President Trump has done by standing up and just, deflecting the fake news. And it's given the ability for others to stand. Yeah. Because, people don't believe the media, and the attacks are just, they're kind of routine. And so I do think it is time, as we are doing here this weekend, to pray. We have to first understand the spiritual nature of what we're up against. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. We need to know, I think, that on God's timeline, where we are. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, from looking at, from a scriptural standpoint, this moment in time that we occupy.
Well, watching what's happening in Israel right now and in God's prophetic timeline, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're living in extraordinary times. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about the return of the Lord, and I'm excited for that too, but this isn't the time for Christians to sit back and wait for that. I think we have an extraordinary moment to get involved. I heard a statistic recently that 1.3 million people who identify as followers of Jesus Christ in Washington State did not vote in the last election. If we would turn out to vote, if we would engage, if it would matter to us, we wouldn't just win, we'd win in a landslide. Yeah. And I think that is the message that needs to come from pastors and Christian leaders across the country right now. Engage, engage, engage.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because, the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Thessalonians, he actually was dealing with that issue 2,000 years ago, where Christians thought, oh, Jesus is coming back, so let's just, I'm going to quit my job, I'm going to pack my suitcase and wait for the Holy Ghost bus to pick me up. Yep. And, he said, don't do that. Mm-hmm. Not only is it hurting the advancement of the kingdom, but it is hurting the reputation of the church. We need to be busy and be salt and light, and that includes voting.
Yeah, especially important, I think, for Christian leaders, pastors in particular, to realize that Christians need to be engaged in the policy-shaping business. Politics determines policy, and policy shapes the nation. And if Christians would engage in the policy-shaping business, I think we'd seen amazing things happen in the country.
So that's, again, part of our focus here, pray, recognizing the spiritual aspects of this, but voting. I mean, we have a responsibility, and that is the minimal of Christian citizenship is voting, but also standing for that biblical truth. You ran for Congress in Washington State, a blue state. We can do more. We can run for school board, we can run for city council, there's more that we can do to be involved and influence our communities.
I'm old enough to remember Keith Green saying one time famously, Lord, how about me not sending my money this time? How about me going?
Yeah.
And this was a huge part of the reason why my husband and I decided that I would run for Congress in 2022. And I think the message needs to be really clear to Christians. It requires courage to stand for righteousness in the public square right now, but we understand God didn't give us a spirit of fear, right? The Apostle Paul reminding young Timothy that fear is not an emotion. It's a spirit, and it's not from the Lord. And when we understand who we are and that our days belong to the Lord, and we're not going to live a single day beyond what the Lord of Heaven's armies has already ordained for us, it takes that spirit of fear away and allows us to step into the calling that God has for our lives.
If we have a fear or a reverence for God, we will not fear man.
Amen.
Just about 30 seconds left. Your focus for this weekend, what are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be talking about courage. I'm going to be talking about the need for God's people to stop sitting on the sidelines and to engage. I love to tell people on my podcast, get off the bench, get onto the battlefield. You got one life. God has you here for this time in human history. Show up for it.
Well, Heidi, thanks for being on the field.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad you're off the bench and on the field. We appreciate your leadership, and thanks for being here this weekend.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, folks, you can actually hear what Heidi has to say. If you are watching online or joining us here at the Pray Vote Stand Summit, you can get the app, the Stand Firm app, or watch on the Real Life Network. All right, as I mentioned early on in the program, protesters this weekend will be assembled for the No Kings demonstration in D.C. and across the nation. And one thing will be very clear, the fanatical animosity against President Trump. But what's also been increasingly clear is the far left's animosity against conservatives and Christians, and even liberals who won't bow to the radical leftist ideology. And sometimes that animosity drives people to take extreme measures in order to silence, intimidate, and even worse. Well, among those who have joined us here in California for the Pray Vote Stand Summit is someone who experienced firsthand what happened when someone with animosity against conservatives uses the legal system to go after individuals like you and me.
My name is Jason McGuire. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Christian leader here in the state of New York. But I'm also, to the state of New York, inmate number 090198. You know, when you think about politics in our day, we tend to watch California and New York. And what happens on either of those coasts that begins to drift into other places across the country. I am the canary in the coal mine here in New York. If you gave the opportunity to leftists, to progressives anywhere around the country, this is what they would seek to accomplish. This is a wake-up call. And for the rest of my life, as a result of Letitia James' lawfare, I will always carry a number with my name, and they will know me as inmate 090198.
With me now to share his story, Jason McGuire, Executive Director of New York Families Forum, which is the family policy council in New York that accomplishes at the state level what FRC does at the national level. Jason, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Tony, it's good to be with you. The last time you and I were together was on the eve of my incarceration.
Yeah.
And for those who may not be familiar with that story, essentially Letitia James, she's not just coming after the president, she's not just coming after pro-life pregnancy centers, but she's actually coming after individuals like myself and organizations that I represent. Letitia James had used a bogus claim to open up a wide investigation to my organization that went on for multiple years. It looked at millions of dollars of transactions, tens of thousands of digital transactions, costing us nearly costing the state of New York nearly $750,000, and my organization almost $500,000 in expenses and lost revenue.
And you ended up being sentenced to jail.
Yeah, so in late July, I went into court. We had agreed to plead to 2 misdemeanors eventually to try to make it stop. And we thought it was a good faith effort to fix a couple of filing errors and some paperwork. Well, when we walked into that courtroom, no sooner had I signed the paperwork than Letitia James' office put out a hit piece against me, essentially accusing me of a litany of things that were not true and never happened. I believe it was libel. As a result of that, though, the judge saw some of her writing, some of the things she said, some of what was in the papers, and then sentenced me to 53 days of intermittent incarceration over 3 different errors on a campaign filing report for less than $1,300. No missing money, just an error on a campaign finance report.
So you pled to this just to make it go away. It was a clerical error.
Yeah, we were facing 2 different trials, one for each of the misdemeanors, that would have cost us an additional $250,000. And so my board and I prayed about it and decided it was time to bring it to an end. And that's when they found out they couldn't beat us in court. They were going to destroy us through the politics of personal destruction.
And so you were sentenced to jail time for that?
I served jail time in the Livingston County Jail. And so I would surrender every Friday in the evening. I would spend Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday in jail for 53 days of weekends.
I want to ask you about that because my first assignment when I was in law enforcement, I worked in in Louisiana. We have parishes, not county. I worked there in the county jail. A difficult position even for me as a deputy, but I can only imagine as someone who was an inmate who was actually, I mean, what was that like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I was not ready for what it was like. When we walked into that jail, I was not prepared for that door to clink behind me.
Yeah.
I walked in to set down my bedding they provided and all of that, and I no sooner, my back was still to the door and I heard the start of the door to close. I didn't realize that meant I'd be in total isolation for that first 4 days I spent in jail. For 2 weekends I was in isolation. I didn't realize how long it would take to work through that system. Then when I got out into the more general population, I was only allowed out in the pod. You couldn't even attend a Bible study without going through a strip search. And so there were a lot of things I learned in that system that I was not accustomed to.
So let me ask you, Jason, how has that changed you? I mean, we don't go through anything in life that doesn't change me. I can just say that I understand because I've been in that environment. It can be traumatic.
Yeah. It's interesting you use the word trauma because that's what people have said to me. They said, you know, this is a form of trauma that you've dealt with. And I recognize it as that. My wife has also felt that. You know, just flying out here to California to be with you for this, she was getting agitated at just the thought that I'd be gone again for another weekend after having gone through that experience. It's impacted me personally in the sense that I probably take things, I hold things a lot looser than I used to.
Yeah.
You know, and you view things differently. But we also recognize that while I would not have chosen this path, it's the one the Lord allowed into our lives. And we're anxious to see what He does with this part of our story.
All right, we just have a little over a minute left. There's a documentary that has been done on this so people can know all about it from start to finish. How can they see that? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, so we put out a documentary called Inmate 090198. That's the number the New York State has assigned to me. I'll carry for the rest of my life. You can find out more about that on our website at newyorkfamilies.org, newyorkfamilies.org. And we're actually scheduling private screenings, and then there'll be a public release coming in late October and early November. Folks can sign up to hear about that at our website at newyorkfamilies.org.
And folks, you're going to be able to hear more of Jason's story if you're tuned in to the Pray Vote Stand Summit, because he's going to be speaking this weekend. Just a little over half a minute left. How can people be praying for you, Jason?
Well, right now, I feel like we're very much in a rebuilding phase. I mean, we've gone through this process of we have suffered bankruptcy. We sold our home. The organization I direct has shrunk in size. And yet, through that process, we see that God is beginning to move. We believe we're on the cusp of some amazing growth. So I'm praying that we will grow and have a great impact in the state of New York and really across the nation for the things that matter for America.
Jason, give the website again that people know how to get in touch with you.
newyorkfamilies.org.
newyorkfamilies.org. Folks, I want to encourage you to pray for Jason. Check out the website and get in contact with him about the documentary. You want to hear the story. Jason, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Tony.
And folks, thank you for joining us as well for this Pray Vote Stand Eve edition of Washington Watch. And I leave you once again with the words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, prepared, and taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council. To support our efforts to advance faith, family, and freedom, please text GIVE to 67742. That's GIVE to 67742. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information, please visit TonyPerkins.com.